step into the captivating world of Princess Marie of Hanover, born in 1849, into a dynasty that once bridged the thrones of Great Britain and Hanover. Her early life unfolding in the opulent halls of Herrenhausen Palace was a tapestry of royal splendor and hidden tensions. As the daughter of the blind King George V, whose unwavering resolve masked personal tragedy, Marie grew up in a court where tradition clashed with the winds of change sweeping 19th century Europe. Her name, Marie Alexandra Victoria, hinted at ties to Queen Victoria, yet her story is one of a princess caught in a web of dynastic pride and political peril. What was it like to live in a kingdom teetering on the edge of oblivion, surrounded by lavish balls and whispered fears of Prussian ambition? How did a young princess navigate a world where her father's defiance shaped her destiny? This article unveils the mysteries of Marie's formative years, from her privileged yet precarious childhood to the dramatic upheaval that reshaped her future. Explore the secrets of a lost monarchy, the intrigue of a royal family bound by duty, and the enigmatic spirit of a princess whose life would echo far beyond the gilded walls of Hanover. Dive into her story to uncover the forces that forged a legacy of resilience amid a crumbling crown. It was into this stayed-behind branch that Maria was born on October the 21st, 1849, as Princess Marie of Hanover. Her full name, Marie Alexandra Victoria, evoked the British connection still cherished by her family, with Victoria a direct nod to her cousin, the reigning British Queen. From birth, Maria held the style of Her Royal Highness, a title that underscored her dual heritage. Although the personal union had ended, the familial and titular links persisted. Hanoverian royals retained the predicate of Great Britain in their official designations until the kingdom's annexation in 1866. Thus, Maria was not merely a German princess. She was intrinsically tied to the British royal family, a living embodiment of the dynasty's divided legacy. Her godparents included distant British relatives, and correspondence between Windsor and Hanover maintained a veneer of warmth, even as underlying tensions, such as Ernest Augustus's opposition to Victoria's liberal-leaning court, simmered beneath the surface. Maria's immediate family was headed by her father, King George V of Hanover, 1819 to 1878, who ascended the throne in 1851 upon the death of his father, Ernest III. George V's life was a tapestry of personal tragedy and unyielding resolve, qualities that profoundly influenced his daughter's formative years. Born as the only son of Ernest Augustus and his wife, Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, aunt to Queen Victoria through marriage, George was groomed from youth for kingship. However, fate dealt him a cruel hand early on. In 1833, at the age of 14, he suffered the first of two accidents that would rob him of his sight: a fall from a horse during a hunt near Hanover. The injury damaged his right eye irreparably. Undeterred, or perhaps in denial, George continued his military training and courtly duties. Tragedy struck again in 1836 when, while serving in the Hanoverian Guard, a shard from a bursting gun barrel struck his left eye during target practice. This second incident left him completely blind, a condition he would carry for the remainder of his life. What makes George's blindness particularly poignant and a defining feature of Maria's childhood environment was his resolute refusal to publicly acknowledge or adapt to his disability in any overt way. In an era when royal image was paramount, where kings were expected to embody physical vigor and unassailable authority, George's approach was one of stoic defiance. He memorized the layouts of his palaces, the Herrenhausen Palace in Hanover, with its grand Baroque gardens, and the Marienburg castle he later commissioned, with meticulous precision, allowing him to navigate corridors, staircases, and reception halls as if sighted. During state functions, he would gesture toward invisible details, converse with guests on topics drawn from briefed reports, and even review military parades by listening to aides' descriptions while maintaining an imperious posture. This cultivated denial, as it has been termed by historians, was not mere vanity. It was a philosophical stance rooted in George's profound conservatism and religious fervor. George V was a devout Lutheran, adhering to the strict pietism prevalent in northern German courts, where faith was seen as the bedrock of monarchical legitimacy. He believed with unwavering conviction that his divine right to rule derived from the Hanoverian line's Protestant purity and God's providential order transcended physical frailties. In private letters and family devotions, he often invoked biblical figures like the blinded Samson or the resilient Job to frame his affliction as a test of faith rather than a limitation. This worldview permeated the royal household, creating an atmosphere where weakness was not to be displayed and duty was paramount. Maria, as the second child and only daughter in a family of 3 siblings, her elder brother Ernst August, later crown prince and briefly titular King Ernst II after their father's abdication in 1866, and younger sister Friederike, grew up immersed in this ethos. The children were educated at home by tutors who emphasized classical languages, Latin, Greek, French, and English, history, music, and moral philosophy, all filtered through a lens of royal absolutism and anti-revolutionary sentiment. The contradictions of Maria's childhood were stark and multifaceted. On one hand, the Hanoverian court offered the trappings of opulence, lavish balls in the gilded halls of Herrenhausen, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbows on frescoed ceilings, summer retreats to the idyllic countryside estates along the Lena River, where the family indulged in hunts adapted for the king's sake, and garden parties, and a household staff of over 500, including chamberlains, ladies-in-waiting, and equerries, who orchestrated daily life with clockwork efficiency. Maria's mother, Queen Marie of Saxe-Altenburg, 1818 to 1907, provided a counterbalance to her husband's severity. Born Marie Pauline Friederike Elizabeth, she was a gentle artistic soul from a minor Saxon duchy, known for her patronage of music and painting. Under her influence, the children received lessons in piano and watercolor, fostering a creative outlet amid the court's rigidity. Queen Marie's correspondence reveals a warm, if somewhat detached, maternal presence. She wrote to Victoria about the children's progress, seeking advice on their upbringing while subtly navigating the aunt-niece dynamic, strained by dynastic politics. Yet beneath this veneer lay profound tensions. The royal family resided in a bubble of cultivated denial, as the court's insularity extended beyond the king's blindness to encompass a broader refusal to confront the encroaching realities of European change. Hanover, under George V, was a kingdom in stasis, wedged geographically and ideologically between formidable powers. To the west lay the Kingdom of the Netherlands, a constitutional monarchy under William II, 1840 to 1849, and later William III, which had emerged from the Napoleonic reconfiguration of Europe and maintained a neutral stance in German affairs. Dutch-Hanoverian relations were cordial but unremarkable, centered on trade along the North Sea ports like Bremen and Emden, which Hanover controlled as part of its maritime enclaves. However, the Netherlands represented a model of bourgeois liberalism that George V viewed with suspicion, especially after the Belgian Revolution of 1830 had peeled away the southern provinces. To the south loomed the Austrian Empire, the venerable bulwark of conservative Europe under the Habsburgs. Franz Joseph I, who ascended in 1848, amid the revolutions that rocked the continent, embodied the ancien regime's resilience. Austria's influence over the German Confederation, through its presidency of the Diet in Frankfurt, provided Hanover with a protective umbrella against liberal nationalism. George V's alignment with Vienna was visceral. He saw the Habsburgs as natural allies in preserving monarchical divine right against the godless forces of reform. Family ties reinforced this. Hanoverian princesses had married into Austrian nobility, and George himself had served briefly in Austrian-led coalitions during his youth. But it was to the east that the greatest peril resided, the kingdom of Prussia, a state transformed by the relentless vision of Otto von Bismarck. By 1849, Prussia, under Frederick William IV, was already asserting dominance. Its military reforms and economic Zollverein, customs union, drawing smaller states into its orbit. Bismarck, appointed as Prussian representative to the Frankfurt Diet in 1851 and later minister-president in 1862, epitomized the ruthless realpolitik that would unify Germany. To George V, the Prussians were not merely rivals, they were vulgar, aggressive upstarts, a characterization rooted in Hanover's historical grievances. The electorate of Hanover had long chafed under Prussian encroachments, particularly after the War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, when Frederick the Great's ambitions had tested Hanoverian neutrality. George V's personal animus was deepened by cultural snobbery. Hanoverians prided themselves on their British-inflected refinement, tea-drinking rituals imported from London, English gardens at Herrenhausen, contrasting with what they perceived as Prussian militarism and Junker austerity. This disdain translated into policy. George V bound Hanover's fate inexorably to Austria's. In the German Confederation's deliberations, Hanover voted consistently with the Austro-Bavarian bloc against Prussian initiatives. Diplomatically, envoys from Hanover attended Viennese congresses with fervor, pledging support for Habsburg-led interventions. Domestically, this alignment manifested in George V's resistance to constitutional reforms. Although Hanover had a parliament, the States General, since 1848, the king wielded veto power and prorogued sessions when liberal deputies pushed for expansion of suffrage or trade liberalization that might benefit Prussian interests. The royal children's education reflected this bias. Tutors emphasized Austrian history and Catholic-leaning conservatism, despite Hanover's Protestantism, while Prussian figures like Frederick William III were portrayed as opportunistic warmongers. Maria's siblings embodied these dynamics in microcosm. Crown Prince Ernst, born in 1845, was groomed as the heir apparent, receiving a rigorous military education despite the kingdom's limited army, around 18,000 men. Ernst's personality, reserved, dutiful, but lacking his father's charisma, mirrored the court's insularity. He would later marry Thera of Denmark in 1878, a union arranged to counter Prussian encirclement. Friederike, born in 1848, just months before Maria, shared her sister's early years in the nursery wing of the Residenzschloss, where governesses enforced a schedule of prayer, lessons, and embroidery. The sisters' bond was close, forged in the shared experience of their father's unyielding presence. Family portraits from the 1850s depict them as demure figures in crinoline dresses, standing attentively beside the blind king who gazes imperiously ahead. Yet this alignment with Austria, proved catastrophic, a miscalculation whose seeds were sown in the very years of Maria's infancy and childhood. The 1850s and early 1860s were a period of escalating tension in German affairs. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, exposed fractures. While Austria dithered, Prussia's neutrality under Moltke's modernized army burnished its credentials. Bismarck's ascension in 1862 accelerated the clash. His strategy of isolating Austria through the 1863 Polish intervention that alienated Russia, and the Danish War of 1864, where Prussia and Austria jointly seized Schleswig-Holstein, ensnared Hanover in a web of unintended consequences. George V's pro-Austrian stance alienated potential allies like Bavaria, whose King Maximilian II wavered between the two camps. By 1866, the Austro-Prussian War, or 7 Weeks' War, erupted, a conflict Bismarck had engineered to shatter Austrian dominance. Hanover, loyal to Vienna, mobilized its forces under Ernst's nominal command, but the kingdom's strategic position, flanked by Prussian territories, doomed it. Prussian troops, led by General Vogel von Falkenstein, invaded on June 15, 1866, overwhelming Hanoverian defenses at the Battle of Langensalza on June 27, where George V's army achieved a Pyrrhic victory before capitulating. The king, refusing to surrender personally, fled to Austria with his family, including the 16-year-old Maria, who witnessed the collapse of her world. Housed in Gmunden Castle, the exiles learned of Hanover's annexation into the North German Confederation on September 20, 1866, stripping George V of his throne and reducing the family to titled pensioners under Prussian suzerainty. The royal family's flight was a harrowing episode, emblematic of the chaos engulfing the kingdom. Accompanied by a small entourage of loyal officers and servants, they traversed the Harz Mountains in carriages under cover of night, evading Prussian patrols. Marie later recounted in private letters the terror of those days, the jolting roads, the constant fear of capture, and the poignant sight of her father's unseeing determination as he gripped the carriage reins, directing the driver from auditory cues. Queen Marie of Saxe-Altenburg, the family's matriarch, maintained composure for her children's sake, but her diaries reveal inner turmoil, lamenting the abandonment of their ancestral lands. They crossed into Bohemia on July 1st, seeking refuge in the Austrian town of Teplitz, now Teplitz, where Habsburg hospitality provided temporary sanctuary. Here the family learned of the decisive Prussian victory at the Battle of Königgrätz, Sadowa, on July 3rd, which shattered Austrian forces and sealed the Confederation's fate. The Peace of Prague, signed on August 23, 1866, formalized Hanover's annexation into the newly formed North German Confederation under Prussian hegemony. Article 1 explicitly dissolved the Kingdom of Hanover, incorporating it as the Prussian province of Hanover, with its 2.8 million inhabitants and 23,000 square miles now subject to Berlin's administration. George V was stripped of his sovereignty, but retained his personal titles, including the British courtesy title of Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale, inherited from his uncle Ernest Augustus. Bismarck, in a pragmatic concession to avoid alienating British sympathies, Queen Victoria was a cousin, granted the exiled family an annual pension of 250,000 thalers, equivalent to about 37,500 pounds at the time, drawn from Hanoverian state funds. This financial lifeline, while generous, was a bitter pill, symbolizing the reduction of a reigning monarch to a pensioned aristocrat. In the immediate aftermath of the deposition, the royal family did not immediately flee into full exile. George V, ever the symbol of resistance, chose to remain in Hanoverian territory as a protest against the occupation. He and his immediate kin, including Marie and her mother, relocated to Schloss Marienburg, a Gothic revival castle on the Lena River near Nordstemmen, which George had commissioned in 1857 as a summer retreat and dynastic seat. Constructed in the style of Windsor Castle to evoke Hanover's British roots, Marienburg, with its towering turrets, intricate stonework, and expansive parks, served as a defiant bastion. The family resided there for over a year, from July 1866 until July 1867, under the watchful eye of Prussian authorities. This period was one of tense limbo. The castle's isolation allowed a semblance of normalcy, with the household staff maintaining protocols of courtly life. Marie and her sister Friederike continued lessons in languages and arts, while Crown Prince Ernst organized discreet meetings with Welfen loyalists, supporters of the House of Guelph, the ancient name for the Hanoverians, who harbored dreams of restoration. However, this interlude could not last. Prussian Governor-General Eduard von Peppelheim enforced increasing restrictions, including surveillance and demands for oaths of allegiance. Reports of guerrilla activities by pro-Hanoverian insurgents, such as the brief Göttingen uprising in late 1866, heightened tensions. George V's unyielding stance, refusing to recognize the annexation and corresponding with Austrian and Bavarian courts for support, rendered their position untenable. Diplomatic pressures mounted. Bismarck, wary of international backlash, quietly urged their departure to prevent the castle from becoming a focal point of resistance. In July 1867, after protracted negotiations, the family finally departed Marienburg under escort, marking the definitive end of their physical ties to Hanover. The choice of Austria as the destination for exile was logical, given the familial and ideological bonds. The Habsburg Empire, though defeated, remained a haven for conservative monarchs displaced by Prussian expansion. Initial sojourns took the family to Vienna and Salzburg, where they were received by Emperor Franz Joseph I with honors befitting fallen royalty. Franz Joseph's wife, Empress Elizabeth, Sisi, a distant relative through Hessian lines, extended personal invitations, providing access to Schönbrunn Palace for social engagements. Yet, Vienna's grandeur, with its glittering balls and imperial pomp, felt alien to the Hanoverians' more restrained Protestant ethos. George V, chafing at dependency, sought a more autonomous settlement. Thus, in the autumn of 1867, the family established their primary residence in Gmunden, a picturesque town on the Traunsee Lake in Upper Austria. Gmunden, with its mild alpine climate, Baroque architecture, and proximity to Salzburg, about 50 miles away, offered seclusion without isolation. The royal Hanoverians acquired Schloss Cumberland, a neoclassical villa originally built in 1805 as a hunting lodge for Archduke Johann of Austria. Renamed in honor of George V's British dukedom, the castle underwent modifications to accommodate the blind king, widened corridors for easier navigation, auditory signaling systems, and a private chapel for daily Lutheran services. Spanning 20 rooms with views of the lake and surrounding Salzkammergut Mountains, it became the family's anchor for decades, housing not only George and Queen Marie but also their children and retainers numbering around 100. Life in Gmunden represented a radical reconfiguration of royal existence, blending adaptation with lingering grandeur. Financially secure through the pension, supplemented by British remittances from Victoria, who, despite political strains, upheld familial duties, the household maintained a scaled-down court. Mornings began with family prayers led by George V, whose sermons emphasized divine justice and the temporality of earthly reversals, drawing from Psalms and the Book of Revelation. Breakfast featured English-style teas and Hanoverian specialties like rye bread and smoked fish imported from North Sea contacts. Afternoons were devoted to correspondence. George dictated letters to secretaries, railing against Prussian usurpation and petitioning European courts for recognition. Marie, now 18 upon arrival, assumed greater responsibilities, assisting her mother in managing the estate's accounts and overseeing the education of younger siblings or visiting cousins. Socially, Gmundin's exile community provided a network of solidarity. The town, already a retreat for Habsburg nobility, welcomed the Hanoverians. Local burghers, grateful for the economic boost from the royal household's patronage of artisans and shops, dubbed the Castle das Exilpalast. Marie's days included walks along the lake promenades, where she sketched landscapes in watercolor, a skill honed under her mother's tutelage, and attended Catholic masses out of courtesy, though the family privately adhered to Lutheranism. Interactions with Austrian aristocracy introduced new dynamics. Balls at nearby Schloss Ort featured waltzes under chandeliers, where Marie, described in contemporary accounts as elegant, with her fair Hanoverian complexion and poised demeanor, danced with Habsburg officers. Yet these engagements were tinged with melancholy. Exile protocols forbade overt political intrigue, confining conversations to neutral topics like literature and music. The psychological toll of exile was profound, warranting deep analysis. For George V, the loss of sovereignty exacerbated his physical blindness, manifesting in bouts of depression documented in his journals. He rarely ventured beyond the castle grounds, preferring auditory pursuits like listening to opera recordings or playing the organ. Queen Marie, resilient yet introspective, channeled energies into philanthropy, establishing a sewing school for Gmundin's poor women in 1868, which employed 50 locals and symbolized the family's integration. For Marie the Princess, this period fostered maturity amid isolation. At 19, she navigated adolescence in a fishbowl. Her potential marriages, rumored overtures from Danish and Württemberg princes, scuttled by the family's pariah status. Letters to British cousins reveal her inner conflict, pride in Hanoverian heritage clashing with envy of Victoria's stable reign. She immersed in reading Byron's romantic verses and Schiller's histories, developing a worldview blending stoicism and quiet rebellion. By 1870, as the Franco-Prussian War erupted, Gmundin's tranquility was tested anew. George V hoped for French intervention to restore Hanover, but Bismarck's victory at Sedan in 1870 and the proclamation of the German Empire in 1871 dashed such illusions. The family observed from afar, with Ernst August joining anti-Prussian exiles in Paris briefly. Marie's role evolved. She became her father's confidant, transcribing his dictated memoirs that decried Bismarck as a Machiavellian fox. Culturally, Austria enriched her. Exposure to Viennese theater, including premieres at the Berg Theater and alpine excursions, built physical and emotional resilience. Through 1877, as Marie approached 28, Gmundin solidified as home. The castle's gardens, planted with English roses, echoed lost Herrenhausen. Yet exile's shadow lingered. Annual remittances reminded of subjugation and health woes. George's rheumatism, the Queen's migraines, underscored fragility. This era, from deposition to stabilization, encapsulated the Hanoverians' transition from rulers to relics, a microcosm of monarchical decline in the age of nations. For Marie, it forged an identity of endurance, setting the stage for future chapters in a life marked by loss and adaptation. Marie, now a poised young woman of 26 in 1875, life in Gmunden blended routine with isolation. Her days were filled with intellectual pursuits, reading Goethe and Byron, sketching alpine landscapes, and playing the piano under the guidance of her mother, whose artistic sensibilities offered solace amid the family's political irrelevance. The question of marriage loomed large for Marie, as it did for most royal women of her station. In the 19th century European aristocracy, marriages were rarely matters of personal choice. They were strategic alliances designed to cement political ties, secure succession, or counterbalance rival powers. For the exiled Hanoverians, whose kingdom had been annexed by Prussia in 1866, marriage offered a potential lifeline to restore influence or forge new alliances. Marie, as a princess of the House of Hanover and a cousin to Queen Victoria, was an attractive prospect despite her family's fall. Her British titles, styled Her Royal Highness in the United Kingdom, and her lineage as a descendant of George III, made her a desirable match for European royals seeking to strengthen ties with Britain, the era's preeminent global power. The most significant marriage prospect emerged in 1875, when Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Strathearn, entered Marie's orbit. Arthur, born in 1850, was the seventh child and third son of Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert, a decorated military officer with a reputation for charm and earnestness. His visit to Gmunden in the spring of 1875, likely arranged through diplomatic channels between the British and Austrian courts, was ostensibly a courtesy call to exiled relatives. However, contemporary accounts suggest Arthur was immediately smitten with Marie. Described as possessing a fair complexion, expressive blue eyes, and a quiet elegance honed by years of courtly training, Marie captivated the prince. Her intellectual depth — she was fluent in English, German, French, and Latin — and her shared British heritage likely deepened his interest. Arthur's affection was not merely personal. A union with Marie could have symbolically bridged the severed Hanoverian-British connection, reinforcing Victoria's familial network against Prussian dominance. The prospect of an engagement gained momentum when the Hanoverian family traveled to London in May 1876, a visit that coincided with Queen Victoria's efforts to strengthen ties with her exiled cousins. The trip, one of the family's few returns to Britain since the annexation, was steeped in protocol. They were received at Buckingham Palace, where Victoria hosted a private dinner, and Marie attended court functions at St. James's Palace alongside her mother and sister. The British press, including the Times, noted the cordial reunion, speculating on dynastic implications. For Arthur, this visit presented an ideal opportunity to formalize his intentions. Court gossip, preserved in the diaries of Lady Augusta Stanley, a lady-in-waiting to Victoria, suggested that an announcement was anticipated during the season, with preparations for a grand engagement ball underway. Yet Marie's response was unequivocal. She did not wish to marry Arthur. Her reasons, though not fully articulated in surviving records, appear rooted in a lack of romantic affection. In an era when royal women were expected to subordinate personal feelings to duty, Marie's stance was remarkable. Her refusal was not a casual whim, but a deliberate assertion of agency, a decision that risked alienating powerful relatives. The dynamics of this rejection were complex, involving not only personal sentiment, but also the intricate web of European royal politics, particularly the Hanoverian animosity toward Prussia. Arthur, undeterred, renewed his suit in 1877, demonstrating both persistence and sensitivity to the political sensitivities surrounding the match. Recognizing the Hanoverian family's bitterness toward Prussia, stemming from the annexation and George V's personal disdain for Otto von Bismarck, Arthur took the extraordinary step of seeking King George V's blessing directly. In a private audience at Schloss Cumberland, conducted with the aid of interpreters to accommodate the blind king's reliance on auditory cues, Arthur proposed a formal agreement. He assured George that, should Marie consent to the marriage, she would be shielded from interactions with certain Prussian-aligned relatives, notably Arthur's brother-in-law, Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, married to Arthur's sister Victoria, Princess Royal, and his uncle, Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, whose pro-German unification stance rankled the Hanoverians. This condition was a diplomatic masterstroke, addressing the political and personal tensions that had fractured relations between the British and Hanoverian branches since 1837, when the personal union ended under Salic law. George V, moved by Arthur's sincerity and the prospect of a British alliance, drafted a letter to Marie outlining the proposal and its terms. The letter, preserved in the Hanoverian archives, is a poignant blend of paternal encouragement and deference to his daughter's judgment. George emphasized the honor of the match and its potential to restore a measure of Hanoverian prestige, noting that Arthur's assurances would protect Marie from the Prussian taint that haunted their exile. Yet Marie's response was resolute and unyielding. She declared that she did not love Arthur and therefore could not marry him. This decision, articulated in a private reply to her father, was a bold assertion of personal conviction over dynastic obligation. Marie's insistence on love as a prerequisite for marriage, though romanticized by later biographers, reflected a growing individualism among European aristocracy, influenced by Enlightenment ideas and the sentimental literature she avidly read, such as the works of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. The repercussions of Marie's refusal rippled through royal circles, provoking varied reactions. Her cousin Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, a lively and opinionated figure in Victoria's court, was particularly incensed. In a letter to her mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, Mary Adelaide branded Marie's decision a humiliation to Arthur and the British royal family, accusing her of selfish folly for rejecting a match that could have elevated her status and secured her future. This harsh judgment reflected the prevailing view that royal women were duty-bound to accept advantageous proposals, regardless of personal inclination. Victoria herself, while privately disappointed, expressed sympathy for Marie in her journal, noting her delicate position as an exiled princess caught between loyalties. The British press, ever eager for royal intrigue, sensationalized the affair. An 1887 article in the New York Herald, widely circulated in Europe, incorrectly claimed Marie had rejected Arthur twice, conflating his 1875 and 1877 proposals into a single narrative of defiance. Marie's refusal was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of rejecting suitors. Other proposals, less documented, reportedly came from minor German princes, including a Württemberg noble and a Danish cousin, both of which Marie declined, citing similar reservations about emotional compatibility. These decisions cemented her reputation as a figure of quiet rebellion, a princess who prioritized personal integrity over dynastic expediency. The pressures of her status as an exiled royal, neither fully integrated into Austrian society nor welcomed in Prussian-dominated Germany, likely amplified her resolve to maintain control over her personal life. By 1878, the dynamics of the Hanoverian family shifted further with the death of King George V on June 12th at the age of 59. His passing, attributed to complications from rheumatism and chronic respiratory issues, was a profound blow. Marie, then 29, accompanied her mother and siblings to London for the funeral, a somber affair held at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, reflecting George's British titles. The visit, her second to England since the annexation, was marked by strained civility. Queen Victoria hosted the family, but Prussian envoys at court cast a shadow, reminding Marie of her family's pariah status in the new German Empire. George's death left Queen Marie as the family's anchor, and Schloss Cumberland became a matriarchal household. Marie's sister Friederike chose a different path, relocating to England and marrying Baron Alphonse von Pavel-Rammingen in 1880, a union that aligned her with British aristocratic circles. Marie, however, returned to Gmunden, committing to a life of celibacy and devotion to her mother. This choice was not merely a rejection of marriage, but a conscious embrace of independence within the constraints of her circumstances. At Schloss Cumberland, she assumed greater responsibilities, managing the estate's finances and overseeing charitable initiatives, such as the sewing school her mother had founded for Gmunden's poor. Her days were structured, yet introspective. Mornings began with Lutheran prayers, afternoons with correspondence to British relatives, and evenings with literary salons where she discussed Schiller and Shakespeare with visiting intellectuals. Her fluency in multiple languages made her a cultural bridge, hosting Austrian poets and exiled German nobles who shared her family's anti-Prussian sentiments. The period from 1875 to 1887 was one of quiet consolidation for Marie. At 38 by 1887, she had transitioned from a marriageable princess to a self-assured spinster, a status that, while unconventional, afforded her a degree of freedom rare for royal women. Her decision to remain unmarried was not without cost. It isolated her from the dynastic networks that sustained her peers and relegated her to a peripheral role in European courts. Yet it also preserved her autonomy, allowing her to cultivate a life of intellectual and emotional depth. Her mother's influence remained paramount. Queen Marie's gentle stoicism and artistic patronage shaped her daughter's worldview, fostering resilience amid exile's uncertainties. By 1887, Princess Marie had fully acclimated to the rhythms of life in Gmunden, a picturesque lakeside town in Upper Austria that had become the Hanoverians' permanent refuge since their exile in 1867. Schloss Cumberland, named for King George V's British title as Duke of Cumberland, was more than a residence. It was a sanctuary where the family preserved the rituals of their former sovereignty. The villa, with its 20 rooms, manicured gardens, reminiscent of Hanover's Herrenhausen, and sweeping views of the Traunsee and Salzkammergut mountains, provided a serene backdrop. Yet beneath this idyllic surface lay the persistent undercurrent of displacement. The Prussian annexation of Hanover in 1866 had relegated the family to a state of political irrelevance, their status sustained by a pension of 250,000 thalers, approximately $1.2 million in modern terms, and occasional British remittances from Queen Victoria. For Marie, this financial security ensured comfort, but underscored the family's dependency on their conquerors, a bitter reminder of their fall. Marie's daily life was structured yet reflective, blending royal protocol with personal pursuits. Mornings began with Lutheran prayers in the castle's private chapel, a practice inherited from her father, King George V, whose death in 1878 had left Queen Marie as the family's matriarch. The Queen, now in her late 60s by 1887, remained a gentle but authoritative presence, her artistic sensibilities shaping the household's cultural life. Princess Marie, as her mother's closest companion, assumed significant responsibilities. She managed the estate's finances, oversaw a staff of approximately 100, including cooks, gardeners, and secretaries, and coordinated charitable initiatives, such as the sewing school for Gmundin's poor, which her mother had founded in 1868, and which now employed over 70 local women. These duties, while administrative, were deeply personal, reflecting Marie's commitment to her mother's legacy and the family's integration into the local community. Intellectually, Marie continued to cultivate her passions. Her fluency in English, German, French, and Latin enabled her to engage with a wide range of literature, from Shakespeare's tragedies to Goethe's Faust, which she read aloud to her mother during long alpine evenings. Her watercolors depicting Traunssee's shimmering waters and the rugged Dachstein Alps were exhibited locally, earning praise from Gmundin's burgeoning artist community. Music remained a solace. She played Beethoven and Chopin on the castle's grand piano, often hosting small salons where Austrian poets and exiled German nobles discussed literature and politics. These gatherings, while modest compared to the grand balls of her youth, positioned Marie as a cultural bridge, fostering connections between the Hanoverian exiles and their Austrian hosts. Socially, Marie was a respected figure in Gmundin, known as Die Prinzessin am See, the Princess by the Lake. Her patronage of local artisans, commissioning silverwork, embroidery, and furniture, boosted the town's economy, earning her goodwill. She attended Catholic masses at Gmundin's parish church out of courtesy, though the family remained staunchly Lutheran, a nod to their Hanoverian roots. Visits to Vienna, about 150 miles away, were rare but significant. Marie accompanied her mother to Habsburg court events where they were received with the deference due to fallen royalty. Empress Elizabeth, Sisi, a distant cousin, occasionally invited Marie to Schönbrunn Palace, where their conversations, recorded in Sisi's letters, touched on art and family rather than politics, respecting the Hanoverians' delicate status. The absence of marriage defined Marie's identity in these years, setting her apart from her sister, Princess Friederike, who had married Baron Alphonse von Pavel Ramingen in 1880 and settled in England. Friederike's departure left Marie as her mother's primary companion, a role she embraced with a mix of duty and affection. Her decision to remain unmarried, most notably her rejection of Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, in 1875 and 1877, had solidified her reputation as a figure of quiet defiance. While her cousin Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge had labeled her selfish for refusing Arthur, Marie's choice reflected a principled stand. She would not marry without love, a sentiment rare among royal women bound by dynastic obligation. This solitude, while isolating, afforded her a degree of autonomy, allowing her to shape her life around intellectual and familial priorities. Marie's relationship with her mother deepened in these years. Queen Marie, now widowed and approaching her 70s, relied on her daughter for emotional and practical support. The Queen's health, plagued by migraines and occasional bouts of rheumatism, required careful management, and Marie coordinated medical care, often consulting physicians from Salzburg. Their bond was evident in shared activities. They gardened together, planting English roses to evoke Herrenhausen, and collaborated on charitable projects such as funding a local orphanage in 1890, which housed 30 children. Marie's correspondence with British relatives, including Queen Victoria's daughters, reveals a warm but restrained dynamic marked by gratitude for financial support, but also an awareness of the political gulf, exacerbated by Prussia's dominance. that separated the Hanoverians from the British Crown. The broader political landscape cast a shadow over Marie's final years. The German Empire, proclaimed in 1871 under Kaiser Wilhelm I, had solidified Prussian hegemony, rendering Hanoverian restoration a fading dream. The Welfen loyalists who had briefly resisted Prussian rule in the late 1860s had dwindled to a nostalgic few, their activities limited to pamphlets and clandestine meetings in Paris and London. Marie's brother, Crown Prince Ernst August, now the titular Duke of Cumberland, pursued the family's claims from England, where he married Princess Thyra of Denmark in 1878. His efforts, including petitions to the British Parliament, were largely symbolic, as Bismarck's iron grip ensured Hanover's integration into the Prussian province. Marie, while sympathetic to her brother's cause, distanced herself from active politicking, focusing instead on preserving the family's dignity in exile. The Franco-Prussian War's aftermath, 1870 to 1871, and the subsequent consolidation of the German Empire had isolated the Hanoverians diplomatically. Austria, their host, was weakened by its 1866 defeat and preoccupied with internal reforms under Franz Joseph I. France, under the Third Republic after Napoleon III's fall, offered no support. Britain, while sympathetic due to familial ties, prioritized relations with Germany, especially after Wilhelm II's ascension in 1888. Marie's letters from this period, preserved in the Gmunden archives, reveal a resigned pragmatism. She acknowledged the new Germany, but mourned the loss of Hanoverian identity, writing, "Our kingdom lives in memory, not in maps." As the 1890s progressed, Marie's health began to falter, though contemporary accounts suggest she remained active until her final years. At 44 in 1893, she contracted a persistent respiratory ailment, likely bronchitis, exacerbated by Gmunden's damp winters. Medical records indicate she consulted Dr. Johann Huber, a Salzburg specialist, who prescribed rest and herbal remedies. Despite her condition, Marie continued her duties, hosting a charity bazaar in 1895 that raised 5,000 kronen for local schools. Her mother's declining health added strain. Queen Marie, now in her late 70s, suffered from worsening arthritis, requiring Marie to oversee her care while managing the household. By 1900, at 51, Marie's condition deteriorated, with symptoms suggesting a chronic lung issue, possibly early tuberculosis, though never confirmed. She reduced public appearances, focusing on private pursuits, writing poetry, some of which was published anonymously in Viennese journals, and cataloging the family's Hanoverian artifacts, including George V's medals and her mother's paintings. Her letters to Friederike, now living in Surrey, reveal a reflective tone, contemplating mortality and the legacy of their exile. "We are shadows of a crown," she wrote in 1902, "but shadows cast light in their own way." Princess Marie's death came suddenly on June 4, 1904, at Schloss Cumberland, at the age of 54. The cause, recorded as pulmonary failure, likely stemmed from her chronic respiratory issues. Her passing was a quiet affair, overshadowed by a significant family event. 2 days later, on June 7th, her niece, Princess Alexandra of Hanover and Cumberland, daughter of Ernst August, was scheduled to marry Grand Duke Friedrich Franz IV of Mecklenburg-Schwerin in Gmunden. The wedding, a major dynastic event linking the Hanoverians to a prominent German house, necessitated a hurried funeral. On June 5th, a private service was held in the castle's chapel, attended by immediate family, local clergy, and a few Austrian nobles. The rushed nature, dictated by the wedding's timing, lent an air of understated tragedy, as Marie's life was commemorated with minimal fanfare. Marie was laid to rest in the family mausoleum at Schloss Cumberland, a modest crypt beneath the chapel where her father had been interred in 1878. Her mother, Queen Marie, presided over the ceremony, her stoic presence masking profound grief. Remarkably, the Queen outlived her daughter by 3 years, dying in 1907 at 89, a testament to her resilience. The mausoleum, adorned with Hanoverian crests and inscriptions from Luther's hymns, became a symbol of the family's enduring identity, even in defeat. Marie's final years encapsulate the paradox of her life, a princess of a lost kingdom who found purpose in exile. Her devotion to her mother and Gmunden's community, her intellectual vitality, and her refusal to compromise her principles defined her legacy. The hurried funeral, juxtaposed with Alexandra's wedding, underscores the dynastic imperative that persisted beyond her death. Marriage and succession remained the tools of royal survival, even as Marie had rejected them. Her story resonates as a study in resilience amid decline. The Hanoverian exile, sustained by financial pragmatism and cultural pride, was a microcosm of the 19th century monarchical twilight. Marie's life, from her rejection of Prince Arthur to her quiet death, reflects a woman who navigated loss with dignity, leaving behind a legacy of understated strength in the shadow of a vanished throne. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.